What if the sky above your home suddenly changed? Not with lightning, not with thunder, but with silence. A silence that watched you. It didn't begin with an explosion. It began with a signal, quiet, distant, like someone breathing through the stars. And then, they came. Not to invade. Not to speak. But to erase. Los Angeles became the first offering. They fell from the clouds like rain, not fire. And what they brought was not war, it was replacement. One soldier. One group of strangers. One child too young to understand, but too wise to forget. They didn't fight to win. They fought so the world would remember what it once was. If your city was turning to dust, would you still light a fire? And when you looked into the sky, and something looked back, would you run, or would you choose to be remembered? This is not a story of survival. It's the story of a signal. And the last man who lit a match inside the storm. It began with a whisper. Far above the calm waters of the Pacific, an unusual signal was picked up by an old deep space listening station outside of Maui. The technician on duty, a man who had worked in silence for over 20 years, leaned closer to his console as static twisted into a pulse, soft at first, then rhythmic, like a breath, or a language. He replayed it, slowed it down, reversed it, but no known code matched. No satellite registered a source. And then, the signal simply stopped. 30 minutes later, an identical transmission was picked up by a military station in Guam. Then another in Japan. Then Chile. All different angles, same sound. Some dismissed it as background radiation. Others, mostly those who had heard it in person, said it felt intentional. It was not loud. It was not clear. But it lingered. Like a voice just beyond the veil, trying not to be heard or trying not to wake something older than we understand. By dawn, civilians had started reporting strange patterns in the sky, clouds forming perfect concentric rings, flashes of blue light with no thunder, and a hum low and constant that made windows shiver ever so slightly. The media called it sky tremors. Scientists dismissed it as solar flares. But those who stood under that sky knew something was wrong. It didn't feel like a storm. It felt like a warning. And then the stars began to move. It started over the ocean, far enough that no one could reach, close enough that everyone could see. At first, they looked like shooting stars, bright streaks cutting silently through the dark, each one drawing a fiery tail that lit up the waves below. But they didn't burn out. They slowed down. Hung in the air for seconds too long. Some fell vertically, others veered with unnatural precision, like they were choosing. Then came the thunder. A deep, guttural roar that rolled in like the earth itself had groaned in pain. Waves surged. Birds scattered. And then the first object hit the sea. Not a splash. A burst. The water recoiled, as if something hot and angry had stabbed through the crust below. From the beach, people screamed. Phones rose in trembling hands, capturing the moment the second object struck and opened. It didn't explode. It unfolded. Panels slid apart with an eerie smoothness, steam hissing from inside like breath from a predator's mouth. Then came movement, legs too many of them unfolding from a metallic core that gleamed like obsidian and bone. A red light blinked once, twice, then flared into a constant, burning gaze. And then it fired. The first beam didn't hit a military target. It didn't aim at a radar station or a satellite dish. It aimed at a lifeguard tower. The structure disintegrated instantly. No sound, just light. Sand turned to glass. The people who had been recording seconds earlier were gone. Not burned. Not torn apart. Gone. All across the coast, the same scene repeated. Fire from the sea. Creatures wrapped in technology like armor and muscle combined. Not drones. Not machines. Organisms built to invade, built to erase. And from the ocean's edge, watching through smoke and screams, a young boy whispered to his father, "Dad, the stars are falling." And they were. But they were not stars. They were here. And they were not alone. Aaron Nance hadn't worn a uniform in 6 months. He'd left the battlefield with a service medal, a stiff handshake, and ghosts he couldn't name. The world thought he was a hero, but in his own mind, he was just a man who'd walked out of a mission others hadn't. A soldier who'd watched too many eyes go cold. He spent his mornings walking through fog-soaked streets of Long Beach, California, drinking coffee that always went cold too fast, and pretending that silence meant peace. But silence had changed lately. The birds didn't sing as early. Planes no longer flew overhead. And the sirens, once rare, now howled at strange hours. When the news finally broke, unknown aerial objects making impact on multiple coasts, Aaron stood still. His hands shook slightly. He didn't look at the screen, he looked at the sky. And he knew. This was not an exercise. This was not a drill. This was something else. His phone buzzed within minutes. Old contacts. Military brass. Recalled status. And an address. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pack. He just put on the dog tags he swore he'd never wear again and walked toward the war, waiting to begin again. But something was different this time. This enemy didn't wear uniforms. They didn't speak. They didn't bleed red. And they didn't fear anything. As Aaron boarded the armored transport outside the base, his eyes scanned the other faces, fresh recruits, young, unsure, carrying courage too big for their bodies. He said nothing, just gripped the metal edge of his seat and thought of the ocean. The same ocean where fire had fallen. Where something ancient had crawled to shore, bringing with it a silence more terrifying than gunfire. And deep inside, Aaron felt it. This wasn't just another battle. It was the reckoning of a species. And they had chosen Los Angeles as the first offering. The armored convoy moved through the city like a ghost through a battlefield, quiet, heavy, and full of things unspoken. Smoke had already swallowed half the skyline, buildings cracked and bent like the earth had exhaled wrong. The streets were littered with the aftermath of something inhuman, cars sliced in half with surgical precision, windows melted inward instead of shattered, trees blackened but still standing as if frozen mid-scream. Aaron's squad, call sign Wolf 3, was dropped 2 blocks from what used to be Santa Monica Boulevard. Their mission was simple: evacuate a pocket of civilians trapped in a school basement and regroup with Echo Team. But nothing was ever simple in the fog of alien war. They moved like shadows, rifles raised, nerves wired tight. Every sound mattered. A creak could be a drone. A light flicker could be a trap. The alien presence wasn't loud, it was felt. A pressure in the air, a wrongness in the light, a hum that you only noticed when it stopped. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Why is it so quiet?" and Aaron didn't answer. Because he knew. Silence in a war zone never meant safety. It meant they were watching. The first sign came in a flash, a wall torn open, not exploded, peeled. A creature moved through it, not fast, but precise. Its body shimmered like wet metal, legs shifting like armor plates breathing. It didn't roar. It clicked. once. And the soldier closest to it dropped his gun, not out of fear, but because his arms just stopped listening. Paralyzed by something unseen. Aaron didn't think. He pulled the trigger. The bullets tore through the creature's shoulder if it had one, and it recoiled with a hiss that vibrated in his teeth. Then more came. They didn't charge. They surrounded. Not hunting. Hurting. For a moment, Aaron understood. These beings didn't see humans as enemies. Not as threats. They saw them as variables. Movements to control. Pockets to isolate. Samples to collect. The squad broke formation, scattering into alleys and behind wreckage. One of them screamed, another simply vanished, not killed, not pulled, just gone, as if erased from reality by light. Aaron grabbed the youngest recruit, no more than 19, and dragged him into a fallen pharmacy, barricading the door with collapsed shelves. The boy was shaking, his helmet gone, eyes wide. "What are they?" he asked. Aaron didn't have an answer. Only a whisper. "Not here to negotiate." Outside, the humming rose again. Steady. Rhythmic. Like a countdown. The boy cried. Aaron stared at the dark, breathing slow, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure they would make it out alive. The war hadn't started. It had already been lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. The silence didn't last. It never did. Outside the pharmacy, the humming intensified until it wasn't sound anymore, but vibration crawling into bones, making teeth ache and breath falter. Aaron crouched near the shattered window, scanning the streets between drifting smoke and crumbling walls, his rifle steady, his heartbeat louder than the war. The boy beside him, still wide-eyed, clutched his weapon like a prayer. And then they heard it, the metal groan of something shifting above them. A drone, the size of a small car, hovered just beyond the rooftop, moving in deliberate arcs, scanning, not searching, recording. It didn't fire. It simply watched, pulsing red from a single, unblinking eye. Then, out of nowhere, gunfire erupted down the block. It was Martinez, the squad's comms tech, who'd been separated during the ambush. He'd found his way into a cross street and opened fire on one of the creatures. Aaron saw the flashes, heard the desperation in the shots. "He's drawing them," the boy whispered. Aaron didn't reply. He knew Martinez wasn't trying to win. He was buying time. And then came the response. The sky itself cracked, a beam of energy lashed down from above, not from the drone, but from something higher. There was no explosion. No flames. Martinez simply vanished in a column of white so pure it blinded the street for 3 whole seconds. When the light faded, nothing remained. Not blood. Not armor. Not shadow. Just pavement. Clean. Empty. The boy screamed and tried to run. Aaron pulled him back, hard, slamming him into the ground and covering his mouth. "They don't kill to scare," Aaron whispered. "They kill to erase." His voice was cold. Not angry. Not afraid. Just, hollow. A veteran's voice. One that had heard too many goodbyes and learned to say none. The loss of Martinez wasn't just tactical. It was emotional. He was the last connection Aaron had to his old unit. A reminder of who they'd been, before the world went silent. And now, he was gone, not just dead, but removed, like a word scratched off a page. Aaron stared into the void left behind and felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just a war. It was a cleansing. and they, whoever they were, had come to make sure nothing human survived to remember. By midday, Los Angeles was no longer a city. It was a scar. Skyscrapers stood like cracked ribs beneath a sky that had forgotten how to be blue. Fires bloomed from craters that glowed with unnatural heat, pulsing as if the earth itself had been infected. The air smelled not of smoke, but of ozone and metal, sharp and thick, like breathing through coins. Civilians, once flooding highways in desperate escape, now huddled in stairwells and sewers, hiding not from noise but from silence. There were no sirens. No broadcasts. Only static and the occasional low rumble of something massive moving overhead, always out of sight, always too quiet to be mechanical, too cold to be alive. Aaron led the boy, name still unknown, through back alleys and collapsed corridors, their path marked only by instinct and an old city map that no longer matched the ground. Buildings had shifted. Landmarks were gone. Malls stood gutted. Parking lots split by jagged fractures like fault lines had opened just to let the monsters through. They weren't the only survivors. Along the way, they found fragments of other squads scattered, wounded, but alive. A woman from Delta Unit, arm broken, eyes glazed. A medic dragging his pack like it weighed the world. Aaron gathered them silently, offering no promises, only motion. Follow. Move. Don't stop. Above them, shadows flickered, not cast by birds, but by something slower, larger, cloaked in clouds. Once, the group passed an overpass still intact, where bodies hung in midair, not suspended by rope, but floating, limp, 10 feet above the ground, as if gravity had forgotten them. No one spoke. No one looked up. This wasn't terror anymore. It was numbness. Trauma so deep it dulled every color, silenced every scream before it could be born. At sunset, they reached the edge of what used to be Westlake. Aaron ordered a stop. He scouted ahead alone and returned with his face changed. Not pale. Not angry. Just still. Downtown's gone, he said. Glass. Ash. Nothing moving. One of the medics muttered, "How do you fight something that doesn't bleed?" Aaron didn't answer. Because the real question wasn't how to fight. It was whether there was anyone left worth fighting for. Night fell. The fires didn't dim. And from somewhere in the distance, the humming started again, slower this time, deeper, like something was waking up, or coming closer, or counting down. They found the house just past a broken freeway ramp, tucked between two apartment towers that had collapsed against each other like wounded giants. The front door was splintered, but not forced, more like something had passed through it, phasing rather than breaking. Aaron approached with caution, rifle steady, squad close behind. Inside, the air was unnaturally still. Dust floated like mist, untouched by wind, as if even the house held its breath. And then came the whisper, not a sound, but the soft thud of something moving inside the walls. They swept the first floor in silence, passing shattered furniture, children's drawings on the walls, and a staircase half swallowed by rubble. Then, from the back of the house, came a voice. Soft. Human. Please don't shoot. Aaron motioned the team to hold and moved forward alone, stepping through a door into the kitchen. That's where he saw them. A woman in her 30s, hands raised but trembling, stood protectively in front of two children no older than 6 crouched under the sink. Beside her, barely breathing, was an elderly man slumped in a chair, face pale, skin damp with fever. The mother's voice cracked. They came through the roof 2 nights ago. One looked at him and he just stopped moving. Aaron looked at the old man. Still alive, but barely not injured, not bleeding, just fading. As if something had turned down the volume of his life. The kids didn't cry. Their eyes were wide, watching Aaron not with fear, but a strange sort of waiting. Like they had already seen too much. He lowered his weapon. "We're taking you out of here." The woman's hands dropped. One of the children asked, "Are you real?" And Aaron didn't answer. Because in that moment, with the walls breathing and the floor humming beneath them, even he wasn't sure. They moved fast, carrying the man, shielding the children. Outside, the sky was beginning to ripple again, not with light, but with shapes. Dark, slow-moving, enormous. Not ships. Not crafts. Something bigger. The woman looked up and whispered, "I think they're looking for people who remember." Aaron didn't ask what she meant. He just held the child's hand tighter. The city was no longer a battlefield. It was a net. And now it was closing. They made it to a maintenance tunnel near the old metro line. Inside, lit only by flickering emergency lamps, they rested. One of the younger soldiers, Tanaka, pulled out a metallic fragment he'd recovered earlier, about the size of a helmet, scorched on one edge. He laid it on the ground carefully, as if it could still bite. "This came off the one I shot," he said. "I think it was breathing." Aaron knelt beside it. The surface was black and porous, like bone, but with a shimmer that seemed to shift as it absorbed light. Beneath a cracked panel, something pulsed faintly, a soft blue glow, rhythmic. Not a battery. A heartbeat. The team circled around, their breath held. The medic approached and touched it with gloved fingers. "It's not metal," he whispered. "It's cartilage, with fiber optics." Aaron stared. It was alive, and artificial. Half organic, half machine, not built, but grown. The realization sank in like ice water. These weren't drones controlled by some distant pilot. These were creatures, engineered to fight, to adapt, to survive. A perfect fusion of flesh and function. One of the Marines muttered, "So what do we aim for?" No one answered. Because if the creatures could regrow, could evolve, then death wasn't their weakness. It was part of their process. Aaron stood and stepped back. He could feel something shift in the tunnel, the air growing denser, the sound around them flattening. Then the lights flickered, and the blue core of the fragment blinked once, then again. "It's signaling," Aaron growled. "We have to move." The team scrambled, grabbing gear, the civilians rushing to stay close. Aaron stuffed the fragment into a lead-lined pack. "We learn nothing if we die here," he said. And no one argued. As they ran, a faint clicking echoed behind them, not loud, but patient, the same rhythm as the fragment. The same breath. The same mind. And somewhere above, far above, something answered. The tunnel spat them out onto a service road at the edge of what used to be Koreatown. The sky above had darkened, not with nightfall, but with something heavier, deeper, a shroud of drifting clouds that didn't belong to the atmosphere, layered in patterns too perfect to be natural. Aaron's boots crunched on the gravel as he scanned upward, hand shielding his eyes, and that's when he saw it, high above the clouds, partially obscured, a structure massive, ring-shaped, rotating slowly like a lid waiting to seal a coffin. The boy noticed it too. "Is that a ship?" he asked. But Aaron didn't answer, because it wasn't a ship. It wasn't moving like a craft. It was still, vast, humming low like a sound only felt through bones, not ears. They had all assumed the invaders had landed, but they hadn't. They were still arriving, still unfolding, and what they'd seen on the ground was just the beginning. Tanaka raised a scope. "That's not a command center," he said. "It's a doorway." The realization hit hard. The meteorites weren't chips, they were seeds, biological implants sent ahead of the main body, growing, learning, feeding. This wasn't just an invasion. It was terraforming. They weren't just here to conquer. They were here to replace. Aaron felt it in his chest, a tightening, not of fear, but of betrayal. Everything they'd prepared for in simulations, bombs, invasions, occupations, meant nothing. This enemy didn't want to rule. It wanted a clean slate. A planet repainted. And humanity? An outdated layer to be stripped away. The woman clutched her daughter closer, and the child, in a whisper so soft it barely escaped, said, "They're making it like their home." Aaron turned away from the sky and looked down the ruined avenue ahead, now glowing faintly with spores drifting like ash. The city was dying, not with fire, but with transformation. And unless they found a way to speak, to strike, to scream back into the dark, Earth would become a memory, rewritten by a species that never intended to share. They moved quickly now, with new purpose, across a landscape that no longer felt like Los Angeles but like the underbelly of something dying. The squad's objective shifted. They needed to reach the last operational broadcast tower in the city, a relic of analog times nestled atop the Griffith Hills, now dormant but still intact, untouched only because it held no digital value to the invaders. To them, it was just an artifact. To Aaron, it was hope. They crossed highways split open like scars, fields of overturned cars grown over with pulsing alien tendrils, and entire neighborhoods cocooned in silence, not because no one lived there, but because something had silenced them. The climb toward the hill was slow, hard, and full of eyes watching from cracks and rooftops. Once, as they passed an old gas station, the lights flickered on despite no power, just long enough to hear a voice, faint and mechanical, repeating a single word in several languages: "Observe. Observe. Observe." It wasn't a warning. It was a mission statement. These creatures weren't curious. They were cataloging. And Aaron now realized the attacks weren't random, they were tests, behavioral scans, reactions recorded and processed. Everything they did was being analyzed. They were not just losing a war. They were being measured for extinction. When they finally reached the tower, the view opened. Smoke blanketed the valley like a dirty ocean, fires blinking through it like dying stars. And through it all, the massive doorway above still pulsed brighter now, wider. The medic worked quickly, rerouting power through a portable rig. The goal wasn't to call for help, there was none coming. The goal was to send something back. A pulse. A jamming signal. A scream. Anything. But the moment they powered up the tower, something shifted. The clouds rippled. The humming grew erratic. And then, from the dark, they came fast, sleek, no longer scanning. Hunting. One of the Marines shouted. The boy ran for cover. Gunfire lit the hilltop. And in the chaos, Aaron did the only thing left to do. He uploaded the fragment from earlier, the alien part still beating in its cage, into the tower's main relay. A single signal burst upward into the sky, a mirror of their own language, twisted through alien code. Then the power cut. Silence returned. And in the stillness, far above, the great eye in the sky blinked. Just once. Not in acknowledgement. In recognition. They were too late. By the time Aaron's unit reached the fallback zone where Fire Team Echo was last reported active, the air already smelled of plasma and scorched steel. The buildings surrounding the plaza were half collapsed, one of them still glowing from the inside as if something had burrowed into its heart and made a nest from the wires. The silence wasn't total, it was broken by the soft mechanical chimes of a fallen comms unit, blinking out a distress signal. No one was left to answer. Bodies lay scattered, but not whole. Some had been turned to ash mid-motion, their shadows burned into the walls like memories refusing to leave. Others were missing limbs, armor sliced clean, but no sign of blood. It was as if their attackers hadn't killed them out of rage or instinct, but precision. Tanaka dropped to one knee, scanning for heat signatures, while Aaron walked the edge of the battlefield slowly, eyes catching on every detail: a helmet with a cracked visor, a rifle still clutched in skeletal fingers, a pack torn open to reveal photos of a smiling child taped to the inner flap. Then he found her. Sergeant Lee Moss, leader of Echo, slumped against the frame of a blown-out vehicle, blood pooling under her boots. She was still breathing, barely. Her eyes fluttered open, locking onto Aaron's face with the kind of clarity only the dying possess. "They knew we were coming," she whispered. "We changed patterns, changed comms. Didn't matter. They were already waiting." Her hand gripped his wrist. "They learn, they remember." She tried to sit up, but her body gave out. Instead, she looked toward the sky, now glowing a faint, unnatural violet. "Don't let it happen again," she said, voice barely a thread. "Don't let them rewrite us." Aaron nodded, swallowing the iron in his throat. He pressed a morphine tab against her neck. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. And just like that, another piece of what made this war human slipped into silence. Behind him, one of his squad mates retrieved a damaged field recorder, Moss's final logs still flickering on screen. They played it back quietly, just for the squad. It wasn't tactics or code. It was her voice, hours earlier, whispering lullabies into the mic for her daughter back home. No one spoke. No one moved. This was not a loss. This was a removal, the way wind wipes footprints off sand, the way time eats language. Aaron stood slowly. He looked at the group, what was left of them, and said, "We move. We hold what we are. They can't take that." And so they did. Through rubble, through grief, through something bigger than war. Through the beginning of the end. The detonation happened without warning. A pulse, not explosive, but absolute, rolled across the basin like a tidal wave of light and force. It didn't burn. It didn't shatter. It disconnected. Entire blocks went dark, not from lack of power, but from a loss of identity. Screens died. Radios hissed into nothing. Even the stars above seemed to dim, as if the sky itself had blinked. Aaron and his team were halfway through an overpass when it hit. For 3 full seconds, the world turned white, not searing, but sterile. Clean. The hum vanished. The air itself felt artificial, too smooth, like the atmosphere had been flattened into something synthetic. When sensation returned, they were on the ground, disoriented, ears ringing, hearts skipping. The civilians they'd gathered still huddled together, but one, the old man, the grandfather, was gone. No body. No trace. Just the faint outline of where he had lain in the dust. The child beside him didn't cry. He just stared into the emptiness and asked, was he erased? No one answered. Because they didn't know. Because deep down, they feared the answer was yes. Something in the sky had spoken, not with words, but with a gesture. A test. A message. A demonstration of what it could do, not in war, but in rewriting reality itself. The fragment Aaron had uploaded to the tower still blinked faintly in his pack, its core cooling, its pulse weakening. But the data had gone somewhere. The signal had been heard. And whatever intelligence hovered in orbit now knew they were learning, adapting, becoming dangerous in ways not predicted. That was perhaps the only reason Aaron's group was still breathing. Not because they were a threat but because they were now a curiosity. They had sent a signal. They had tried to speak. And like a child noticing a single ant crawling away from the swarm, something above had chosen not to crush them, yet. The rest of the night passed in near total stillness. No more attacks. No more sightings. Just the sound of distant wind and the occasional flutter of debris shifting in scorched alleyways. But it wasn't peace. It was observation. It was calculation. Aaron stayed awake the whole time, rifle on lap, watching the sky like it might blink again. And when dawn came, soft and colorless, no one cheered. No one relaxed. Because they understood now the enemy wasn't hunting. It was watching. And something worse than extinction was beginning. By the time the second morning came, the city no longer resembled anything built by human hands. Streets were sunken, as if the concrete had softened overnight and settled like tired skin. High-rises leaned against each other like old men in pain, and the air carried a fine gray dust that tasted like rust and memory. Aaron stood atop the slope of what used to be a parking structure, looking out over the ruins of Westlake. His armor was scorched, his face marked with soot and blood, some of it his, most of it not. The squad was down to 7, and even that number felt temporary. The medic was gone. Tanaka hadn't spoken since the pulse. The civilians followed every motion like shadows clinging to a dying fire. No one asked where they were going anymore. No one dared to use the word safe. They simply moved, and when they couldn't, they paused. That morning, Aaron carried the youngest girl, the one who hadn't spoken since her grandfather vanished, wrapped in his jacket. Her eyes remained wide open, staring not at him, but at the sky behind him, as if watching for something only she could see. They came upon an old chapel, half buried under the collapse of an adjacent building. It was intact enough to shelter them, the stained glass cracked but still glowing with red and gold. Inside, pews had been knocked sideways, but a candle still burned on the altar, untouched. Aaron didn't speak. He simply lowered the girl onto a bench and sat beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She just whispered, "I think they're waiting for us to forget." That night, no one slept. The dust hung in the air like a veil, and every breath felt like pulling the memory of fire into your lungs. At one point, Aaron thought he heard music, faint, distant, like something recorded long ago still echoing through broken speakers somewhere deep beneath the rubble. It sounded like a lullaby. But it could have just been the wind. At dawn, the squad gathered again. Faces pale. Bodies bent. But alive. Aaron looked at them, not as soldiers or civilians, but as witnesses. People who had seen the end of something sacred and still stood. He strapped on his weapon, adjusted the last round in his belt, and pointed to the east. "There's still a command post at Palmdale," he said. "If anyone's still out there, they'll be there." No one cheered. But no one objected. They moved again, not because they had hope, but because movement was all that kept the silence from swallowing them whole. And in the distance, far beyond the hills, the sky remained unchanged, not bright, not dark, just watching. The road to Palmdale was not a road anymore. It was a wound cut deep into the earth, carved by things too large to see, too patient to chase. Aaron led them along its edge, past cars turned inside out like paper toys, past fields of power lines that hummed with foreign currents. Occasionally, they saw drones not flying, but idle, hovering in place, their lights dim, their movements still, as if waiting for instruction. They didn't attack. They didn't track. They simply watched, spinning slowly, like mechanical sentinels built to study the final days of a species. The survivors walked in silence. The woman clutched her daughter close. The boy who once trembled now carried a broken rifle like it still meant something. And Aaron, carrying what was left of the radio core in his satchel, no longer hoped to find allies. He just needed to find a voice that hadn't gone quiet. Palmdale appeared not as a city, but a whisper of one, outlines of structures buried in haze, soundless and still. They approached slowly, cautiously. Then, from a crater near what had been an airbase, a figure rose. A man, armored in scavenged gear, weapon slung across his back, eyes sunken but sharp. He waved once. Then others followed. Survivors. Not many. But enough to remind them that humanity hadn't yet become a myth. In the bunker below the base, dimly lit, and stinking of oil and dust, Aaron handed over the fragment. The technician on duty, a woman missing 2 fingers and most of her voice, examined it with reverence. "You sent them something?" she asked. "We tried," Aaron replied. "Don't know what it said." She plugged it into a console jury-rigged from decades-old tech. It flickered once, then pulsed. And in that pulse, for a fraction of a moment, a waveform appeared, not human, not machine. Something in between. Something that heard. "They responded," she said. "Not in words. In frequency." The team stood silent. "Do you know what it means?" someone asked. She shook her head. "It means they're listening." Outside, the wind had picked up, dragging ash across the desert floor. Aaron stepped out, looked at the empty horizon, and felt it again, the presence. The war wasn't over. It would never be. Not while memory still held. Not while even one voice dared to speak. Not while something above still waited to see what would become of the ones who refused to disappear. And so he whispered, to no one, to the sky, to the dust, "We're still here." And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed. Time no longer measured itself in days or hours, but in moments between silence and signal. The sky above California remained layered in drifting shadows, the great doorway still hovering behind clouds that never rained, never moved, just remained. The world had not been saved. Cities lay in ruin. Nations disconnected. Satellites silenced. But people still moved. Still carried water. Still lit fires. Still told stories in the dark, because without stories, nothing survived. Aaron stayed in the bunker near Palmdale, now a kind of sanctuary, not from attack, but from forgetting. More survivors arrived over time. A pilot from Arizona. A teacher from Oregon. A blind musician from San Diego who claimed he could hear the sky breathing. No one questioned him. The technician they now called her Echo managed to isolate parts of the alien signal. Not language. Not thought. But rhythm. It pulsed like memory. And then, one night, as Aaron stood outside beneath the endless gray, a single flare shot upward from the far horizon, not human, not alien, something else. A spiral of light that twisted once, then vanished. No explosion. No trace. But it meant something. It was acknowledgement. Perhaps even respect. Aaron didn't smile. He simply nodded. They had not beaten the enemy. They had not driven it away. But they had done something rarer. They had made it pause. Remember. Consider. And in a universe where entire planets could be erased without name or echo, that was a miracle. The little girl, the one who no longer cried, who had lost more than most, now helped echo log signals. The boy trained with Aaron, learned to move quiet, shoot straight, speak little. The woman found books in the ruins and read aloud each night stories about Earth, about oceans, about songs. And Aaron, each morning, lit a single fire at the edge of the crater, using wood he collected himself. Not for warmth. Not for light. But for memory. For defiance. And for the promise that as long as even one match could burn in the dark, humanity would not be rewritten. Not entirely. Not yet. Somewhere, far beyond the stars, something had seen them and turned away. But Aaron knew it would return one day. It always did. And when it did, it would find a world not rebuilt, but remembered. And in that memory, fire still lived. They didn't leave because we defeated them. They left because, for a moment, we made them see us. Not as insects. Not as threats. But as echoes, of something once sacred. Aaron didn't win. He didn't escape. He simply lit a fire in the dust, not for warmth, but for memory. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Now I turn to you. What moment in this story stayed with you the most? Was it the silence? The pulse? The little girl's voice in the ruins? If you had been in Aaron's place, would you have kept walking? Would you light that fire? Or let the dust take you too? Let me know in the comments. If this story made you feel something, fear, sadness, or hope, tell us why. I read every word. And if you want to explore more stories like this, alien encounters, unexplained signals, human resilience in the face of the unknown, then subscribe to the Alien Storyverse. There are more stories waiting to be told. And something out there is still listening.